during the 2019 bushfires, they told you that the fires there were unprecedented. Even though Australia had far bigger fires back in 83, at 75, 67, and for centuries prior. In the 1700s, Captain Cook's nickname for Australia was the continent of smoke. I wonder why. The only difference between then and now is that before, there were no cell phone cameras in the middle of the outback, so you didn't see it. Global wildfire activity is actually decreasing. It's only getting worse in the areas that practice aggressive fire suppression, like the American West. But few are eager to tell you the truth. Instead, they tell you the sky is falling like never before, and it's all the fault of our modern, shitty climate. When was the climate not shitty? Was there some magical time in history when droughts didn't exist? When do they think the ideal climate was? 30 years ago? Back in 1991? When the Oakland firestorm killed 25 people and destroyed nearly 3,000 homes and did $2.5 billion of damage in a day? Maybe the ideal climate was 100 years ago, when we didn't have all the pollution and power plants. Back in 1910, when the big blow-up burned 3 million acres across 2 countries in a weekend and killed 86 people? Or was the climate optimum even further back? Way back when the population of the Earth was less than 1 billion people. Less consumers, no SUVs, and hardly a whiff of CO2 in the air. Like in 1871, when the worst wildfire in recorded human history, the Peshtigo Fire in Wisconsin, burned over 1 million acres in a few hours and vaporized more than 2,000 people. They don't even know the death toll within plus or minus 1,000. And the people who fled for refuge in the Peshtigo River boiled alive. And that wasn't even the biggest fire that year. Hell, it wasn't even the biggest fire on that day. The same day, the Great Michigan Fire burned 3 million acres alone. In 2020, California had its biggest fire year in history, with people panicking over the consumption over 4 million acres of vegetation. But in 1871, those 2 fires alone burned more in a single day than California did in the entirety of its worst year. And neither of those 2 fires even have a place in history, because the Great Fire of Chicago ignited on the same damn day. 1871 was a hell of a year.
We'll do it live. Okay. No. We'll do it live. Fuck it. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live. And things suck.
Learn your history, or you are what, folks? You are condemned to repeat it over and over and over and over and over and over. If it's annoying how many times I'm saying over, just think of how annoying it is to watch the same damn fire burn every couple of decades in the exact same way, and we never learn. We are going to have ourselves a bit of a history lesson today. And I think y'all are gonna see some images that you've probably never seen before, and yet at the same time, you've seen them all before. It'll make sense in a bit. Now, something else is gonna happen that is truly unprecedented, okay? You know, I'm always joking about how the word unprecedented is the most butchered word in the modern language. Now, this is unprecedented. I was wrong. You heard me. I was wrong about a fire. You may never hear that again, because guess what? I'm the wildfire whisperer. I'm always right. Just kidding. I was wrong about the Eaton Fire. I'm not quite sure how we got this so wrong, but we are going to correct it today. Now, in the past, what have I said repeatedly about the Eaton Fire? What have I said? I've been very consistent about this, by the way, and I'm always contrasting it with the Palisades Fire. The thing I keep saying is the Palisades Fire, you know, it did not have the same kind of winds that the Eaton Fire did. The Eaton Fire was legitimately unflyable. They tried to fly helicopters and they had them grounded within 20 minutes. And it was at night, so those thresholds are already sort of different. Beyond that, The Palisades fire, I'm always saying, well, that's Gavin Newsom's fault because it started on his property. And his overgrown brush, where they didn't do any of the fuels clearance that they were supposed to do for decades and decades, that's what caused the entire Palisades to burn down. Whereas the Eaton Fire started on fed dirt, and it was started by SoCal Edison. Now, I also said it would be way too much of a stretch. It would be too much of a bank shot to blame Gavin Newsom for the Eaton Fire, and that's why I didn't do it. I may be wrong. I may be wrong, and we'll get into that. So what else do we have going on? We've got a miracle in the Palisades that for some reason nobody's talking about. And I'm not quite sure why that is. Why is no one talking about the Vista Grande miracle? Am I the only one who's aware of this? Maybe we should start with that. Should we start with the Vista Grande miracle? Because, you know, instead of this always just being bad news, why don't we have some good news for once? The Vista Grande miracle. Now, what is the Vista Grande miracle? What is Vista Grande? Who in the Palisades knows Vista Grande? Vista Grande Drive. It is, it's just to the east of Palisades Drive. It is up on a very, very tall, very steep ridgeline. Now, you guys remember this video that we played of copter operations on the Palisades fire. This video was really dramatic, but I wanted to point out something. Now, this is from one of the QRF helicopters doing very effective drops. This is on the beach side. This is about 3 or so in the afternoon. So we're what, 4.5, 5 hours into the IA. And of course, the fire's already reached the ocean in multiple spots. The winds aren't really that bad right now. At this point, they hadn't even exceeded 35 miles an hour, but the fire had already reached the ocean. So it comes in, goes for a drop right here. Now, this is not Vista Grande Drive. However, these drops right here were extremely effective, and they saved all but one of these homes right here. Only one home right there burned. So the work that the QRF copters were doing right here was extremely effective, which just shows you how critical it is that the copters were hampered early on in the firefight. Because as you can see, when they're ripping, they're doing a lot of good. Now, I'm gonna try to scrub through this video. I wanna find this one spot. See if we can get, man, dude, the fire front is just so massive. It is so big. But now coming around Palisades Drive, let's maximize this so we can see it a little bit better. Here we're coming through, you can see how steep it is on both sides of Palisades Drive. And Daniel Firecopter says, fittingly, he says, helicopters are amazing. You're just bragging. You're bragging because you are a firecopter. I think there's something a little cheesy about bragging about yourself, but I agree. Copters are amazing. Now look at this. Look at that. Look at that. What are we seeing right here in the middle of the frame? I'm gonna orient you right here, okay? This is where we're looking. Vista Grande Drive, okay? Now, let me get us into, let's see if we can do 3D. We'll do globe view. Let's see if we can get this rolling. Ooga booga. There it is. All right. You can see just how steep it is. So just to try to orient you over where we were looking, now this is Vista Grande Drive. And you'll notice these homes are still here, despite being surrounded by fuels in this extremely steep terrain. Nothing there should survive. Now, a bunch of homes interior to that did burn up. You can see all these footprints there, but for some reason, this street did exceptionally well. Now, why is that? Why is that? Now, there's one thing that's pretty obvious in this clip, right? When you look at that, you can see how much fuels clearance they've done, several hundred feet below their homes. Several hundred feet below their homes. You could even see that on Google Maps. But This is from the Palisades fire in 2019. I filmed this. So this is fire burning up into that area before they had done fuels clearance. This is nature doing a little fuels clearance for them. And you can see this fire ripping uphill. This was a pretty nasty fire, but they had so many copters, these amazing Daniel Firecopters that were able to reload at the San Ynez Reservoir 20 seconds away, that it was a nonstop air show. And you're gonna see this in a second. I mean, I got some of my best footage. This is Mill Creek Hot Shots walking up Vista Grande. And then the air show was just absolutely incredible. Absolutely nuts. Tankers, copters, everything. And they managed to successfully, oh, and the scoopers did absolutely amazing work as well. So they managed to stop this fire. They managed to protect all these homes. And so what ended up happening is now in 2019, you actually have some pretty good fuels clearance. Look at all those fuels that got rid of. Here's there's John, the soup of Mill Creek, joking around with the homeowner. So this is the area where it was burning. So it was a relatively small fire. Now, if we're to go back to Google Maps, you can see the footprint of the fire. You can still sort of see it. Although it's not well defined, just look at the difference in the fuels. See how much lighter the fuels are, like around here, where the fire was, where we were positioned, where that fire was burning primarily. It's a lot less dense right there than over here, okay? Now, look at their fuels clearance. Look at that buffer that they created for their homes. This is what I'm talking about, folks. This stuff works. So not only do they have lighter fuel loading because they had a more recent fire right there, that wasn't everything. Them getting rid of all this stuff, and you could see it in that video from the helicopter. That's not brand new, okay? That was there during the fire. So because these people, they had a fire in their backyard, they decided, hey, maybe we should get rid of some of the fuels. And they were very diligent about cutting a massive fuel break. And as you can tell, they were clearly all working together, because you've got like a dozen homes all with that same level of clearance. Guys, this is how you do it. Look at that. That's how you protect your communities, okay? Really important. Really, really important. Now, we talked about fire history. We talked about being condemned to repeat it. Why do we say that? Where have we heard that before? I'm not trying to tease you guys on the Eaton Fire. We're going to get to that.
How long have you lived in the Palisades? And have you?
I grew up here, 1965.
Wow. Have you ever seen anything like this before?
1979, same fire. Yeah.
So this is a repeat of 1979.
Yep. I think that's the last time that it burned. Yep.
Aaron, we thank you for talking to us, and we're wishing you all the best.
Thank you.
Please stay safe.
Thank you.
Every time I play this clip, I always love just how calm she is. You know, even though through this disaster, it just speaks volumes to how much confidence you have when you learn your history. And I will say this, once you learn your fire history, it demystifies so much, because when it comes to fires, past is prologue. It never stops. And it never ceases to amaze me just how much these fires follow the exact same patterns. Now, she mentioned 1979. 1979. She was off by 1 year. But she was right. The year was 1978. Now she's saying it was the same fire. Maybe she's just distorting things. Maybe her memory has lapsed. Look at this image. This is from the 1978 Mandeville Canyon and the Agora Malibu firestorm. Does that look familiar to you? Yeah, that's Palisades High School. That's Pali High, with the entire mountainside on fire. In 1978. Casey K points out that reporter was so disappointed with that answer. Dude, Casey, you just touched on the exact point. Everybody is constantly trying to panic. Everybody's constantly trying to tell you that things are unprecedented. That clip that we played at the front of the show from Hotshot, that to me, it's the best way that I could try to communicate the permanence of this phenomenon, right? How it just keeps happening, and there's a reason for that. We could go into the weeds forever talking about fire history, and we're going to now. And it's going to tie into the Eaton Fire. Now, this is Pali High back in the day, This is from 1978. 1978. Does this look familiar, guys? I'm always baffled and amazed when I see these pictures. 1978 fire as it approaches the Palisades. Now, obviously, things look quite a bit different. You know, things have changed in the last 50 years. But at the same time, the fire hasn't changed. Dude, this is a monster fire. Look at that header on that thing. That thing is absolutely ripping. So there's, Joan Didion had some like famous description of this fire. And I want to read it to you because it's pretty indulgent, but it is intense. And it'll give you, firsthand account of what that fire was like. Because we have this tendency to believe that fires are just so much more intense now. Are they really? Listen to this. This is from Joan Didion. One morning during the fire season of 1978, some months after we'd sold the house on the Pacific Coast Highway, a brush fire caught in Agora in the San Fernando Valley. Within 2 hours, a Santa Ana wind had pushed this fire across 25,000 acres and 13 miles to the coast. Now, do you guys know where Agora is? I'm going to orient you guys really quickly because we're talking about a fire that hit the coast from Agora. Let's get back on Google Maps, and I'm just going to show you how far away Agora is. Agora is here. You guys see that? This is Agora. Now, where it started was in between Cornell and Canaan. So this was the ignition point for the Agora Malibu firestorm, which basically combined with the Mandeville Canyon fire. So you have your point of origin right here, okay? Let's do measured distance. And it got all the way to Malibu. That's 8 miles. That's 8 miles, but that is a long ways away. And it got there very quickly, 2 hours. And it's very similar to the Woolsey fire. The Woolsey fire followed the exact same pattern. It just started deeper interior, right? It started, Rocketine in Woolsey Canyon? But basically, these fires they follow the same model. They blast through Canyon Point Doom and Malibu Canyon, and they end up at the ocean. They always end up at the ocean. That's why when the Palisades fire ignited in January, I was saying this thing's going all the way to the ocean. It's very obvious because they always do. So I want to recount this from 1978. Brush fire caught in Agora. The Santa Ana winds pushed this fire within 2 hours across 25,000 acres and 13 miles of the coast, where it jumped the Pacific Coast Highway as a half-mile firestorm, generating winds of 100 miles per hour and temperatures up to 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. 100 miles an hour, guys. Unprecedented, right? 1978. Refugees huddled on Zuma Beach. Horses caught fire and were shot on the beach. Birds exploded in the air. Houses did not explode, but imploded, as in a nuclear strike. By the time this firestorm had passed, 197 houses had vanished into ash, many of them houses which belonged or had belonged to people we knew. A few days after the highway reopened, I drove out to Malibu to see Amado Vasquez, who had some months before bought from the Freed estate all the stock of Arthur Freed orchards and had been in the process of moving it a half mile down the canyon to his own nursery, Zuma Canyon Orchards. I found him in the main greenhouse of what had been Arthur Freed Orchards. The place was now a range not of orchids, but of shattered glass and melted metal and the imploded shards of the thousands of chemical beakers that had held the Freed seedlings. The new crosses. I lost 3 years, Amado Vasquez said, and for an instant I thought we would both cry. You want today to see the flowers. So, dude, they're shooting horses on the beach. That part got me the most. I don't even want to imagine that. It's so horrible. But this, the visual of birds exploding or catching fire in midair, that fire was absolutely ripping. Royal News says, it sounds like the Woolsey fire. Yeah, it sounds exactly like the Woolsey fire. Because guess what? Fires are very predictable. They follow the exact same patterns because they just follow basic rules, right? Fuels, topography, and weather. Weather, topography, fuels, WTF. Some of these images, this is from the Palisades, right? October 23rd, 1978, a fire broke out at 9:41 a.m. It's almost the same time. They're just off by like 40 minutes. Near Mulholland Drive and the 405 freeway in the Santa Monica Mountains. Stoked by Santa Ana winds and very hot, dry conditions, within a few minutes, a large brush fire started moving westward. 30 homes were destroyed in Brentwood and the Pacific Palisades. It could have easily been 10 times that number. By contrast, the 91 Oakland Hills fire destroyed 3,800 homes and killed 25 people. And that's the thing. It's like, you know, as gnarly as that fire was and how far it ripped and how quickly it ripped, and clearly it had the same winds, at least, you know, the same claims of 100-mile-per-hour winds, right? The thing ripped all the way to the ocean. There was no stopping it. And it only took out like 200 homes. That's crazy, right? But they just got lucky, you know. And the Oakland Hills firestorm was an absolute nightmare. 3,800 homes, 25 people dead, and that was a rekindle, just like the Palisades fire. Steve Kerrigan says, I was in Holzer Canyon below Lake Piru on Friday, all burnt up from a shooting event a few months ago. Same fire as in Hot Shot. Yeah, it was. I remember filming. What was it? It was the Holzer fire, right? Yeah, the Holzer Canyon. It was the Holzer fire back in 2020. It was kind of like right before the big lightning complexes blew out up in NorCal. And it was the same fire, dude. It was right behind that shooting range. And you know, those fires out there, they're relatively benign. It's kind of just, it's burning up in that craggy rock, grassy area. It doesn't really do a ton. It's usually good for like 3,000 to 5,000 acres, but that's about it. But some of these images, I mean, it's like if you were to just take a black and white process on some of the photos from the Palisades fire that we just had, it would be identical to this. But the thing is, it goes back way further than that. Look at this. Does this not, I mean, this, if you guys don't recognize this is the Castellamare Drive. It's a very iconic drive that goes up through the Palisades. This whole area burned through. This is from 1938. 1938. This is from November 26th, so very late in the year. This is the old Topanga fire. There's been multiple old Topanga fires. Burns the Pacific Palisades, 16,500 acres. Now, strangely enough, in 1993, we had the old Topanga fire, and that burned 16,500 acres. What the hell, dude? The exact same acreage between 1938 and 1993. This one burned 350 structures. Now you can see how much less dense it is, right? Look at how few homes there are. So there's your answer for why you have less structure loss. It's because the density was just so different. 1938. Every time somebody, by the way, the 1930s were cranking. Like you guys have heard about the Dust Bowl, right? We had some pretty gnarly drought in the 30s, and some of the worst fires were in the 30s. And it's pretty interesting that we're kind of coming up on basically an 80 to 90 year cycle, it seems like. Roughly around 80 years, because like we started getting some pretty gnarly mega fires like 2017, 2018. And the thing is, like when you look at the Southern Pacific Oscillation, the thing that sort of drives the El Nino and La Nina cycles, I believe it's an 80-year cycle, isn't it? Or is that the Atlantic side? But you tend to see these things come in those sorts of waves. And so I find it very interesting that we're having some pretty gnarly fires that kind of coincide with the 1930s. But some of the images, this is stuff burning right on the coast in 1938. And I mean, like, for those of us who drove this road, PCH, every single day growing up, you know, when I was living in Malibu Lake and my family was living in the Palisades, we would be driving this road all the time. This looks so hauntingly familiar that I swear this could be a photo from the Woolsey fire or the Palisades fire, just converted to black and white, if you gave these guys top hats. This is from 1943. 1943. How hard is this image with this lady? She was the fire chief with 3 Dobermans. This is a hard picture. I love this picture. Now this one, 1956, December 25th. This was on Christmas Day. So when we have Gavin saying, it's unprecedented, Unprecedented winds, unprecedented fires in winter. Never had this before. He either doesn't know his history or he's lying. Like, do you understand? Maybe my frustration with Gavin is inexplicable, but I'm trying to show you this is why. Because when you learn your fire history, you will never look at the unprecedented people the same ever again. You will reject everything they say because you're like, yeah, I'm sorry, we've seen this before. This is why that whole unprecedented thing drives me crazy. And that's why whenever the climate change people are using unprecedented to try to convey, whatever the message is, whatever the top-down like communist government they want, and they use unprecedented, I always know, okay, you're not worth listening to. Like, if you're going to tell me that things are getting worse, tell me they're getting worse, but don't say that they're unprecedented. On Christmas Day, the Eaton Fire of 1956, with 70 to 90 mile per hour winds, 40,000 acres. That's way bigger than the Palisades Fire. On Christmas Day, the fire, which broke out in Newton Canyon during 70 to 90 mile per hour Santa Ana winds, charred 40,000 acres. Arthur William Clark Powell gives a vivid description of the fire in his book, Ocean in View. Powell, who lived at Broad Beach in Malibu in the 1950s, describes how he and his wife and several neighbors, with the help of 2 Edison line crew workers, fought to save their homes from the firestorm, armed with shovels and garden hoses. You see that? We used to have a legacy of staying and defending our homes successfully. I want to get back to that. He defended their homes with shovels and garden hoses. They were fortunate. Many were not. 250 homes and structures were destroyed. 20 years later, Powell's home burned in the 1978 Canaan Fire, which followed the same path to the sea, which was the fire we just talked about. That was the Agora Malibu firestorm. How brutal is that? Right there is a perfect microcosm of exactly what I'm talking about. Learn your history, folks. How many times do you have to see this? The dude who survived this fire then went ahead to lose his home in the same exact fire. This is from 1956. I love these images. And it's just so crazy to see how, like, even though the cars will change, some of the architecture is the same, like that image of Castellammare. That, right? Like, some of these buildings are still there. But the one thing that's permanent is that smoke column leaning over towards the Pacific Ocean. It's the exact same thing over and over and over again. Over and over and over again. But I love these images, and I think it's good for people to see them. Dude, I love those old fire trucks, by the way. Here's a little side note. Why can't we make cars that look this cool anymore? Why do we constantly make these cars that are so boring and generic looking? You can make a car any shape you want. Like, make it out of modern materials. Just make it cool. These cars were cool looking. Dude, these fire engines were badass. Look at that. That's LA County. Look at that rig. Love that. So we see the same thing over and over and over again. And we've got 1956, 1938, 1978, and then again in 1993. So 1993 was a really gnarly year. 1993 had the prelude to the Woolsey Fire. And that was the old Topanga fire that ripped through Malibu. It burned down Sean Penn's home. He since has had his home nearly burned down 2 more times on subsequent fires in Malibu. Something else happened in 1993. Something else happened in 1993. Who knows about the 1993 Kinaloa Fire? Raise your hand if you know the Kinaloa Fire and why the word Kinaloa might sound familiar. Plate of Shrimp says 15 to 20 year cycles. Bingo. Typically what we see is like 25 years. So for example, 1993 to 2018, 25 years. So that was in between the precedent to the Woolsey Fire, which was the Old Topanga Fire of 93. And, it burned up like 750 structures and burned all the way to the ocean, killed 3 people. Like I said, it burned down Sean Penn's home. It really ravaged Malibu. So that range of 15 to 20 years, yeah, I'd say that's about right. That's about right. That's how long it takes for enough fuel to grow to the point where not only is it dense enough to carry that fire across the landscape with that kind of intensity, but you've got enough dead and downed debris on the floor, as well as so much overgrowth. You have too much resource competition. And so these things are starting to get more dried out as they mature. And then on top of that, you've got your drought cycles. And the way that the drought cycles tend to play out is it's when you get a combination of the boom and the bust. So what really sets you up for that really gnarly fire season, usually the last thing that you see before a gnarly fire season is a very wet year. Okay, we saw this transitioning from 2019 to 2020, where you had multiple years of drought that killed a bunch of vegetation. So now you have a bunch of dead stuff. And then you have 1 year of a bunch of rain. And then all of a sudden you have those fresh grasses. You have that huge fresh grass crop that's gonna make that ignition really easy. So then with that new fresh grass crop, you get high probability of ignition, and then that carries into that drought-stricken dead stuff. And so that's usually the setup. It's like drought, 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 big rain year, massive nuclear fire year. That's what you. So now this is 1993. This is just a few days before, like I think it was 5 days before the 93 Malibu fire that ripped through Malibu. Also the Laguna fire. I think the Laguna fire at this point was already ripping. 93 was a brutal year. And you'll notice that you just have years like that where it's just everything's in alignment. So you had the nasty Laguna fire, you had the Malibu fire, and you had the Kinaloa fire. This is in Altadena. Took out a bunch of homes, not nearly as many as the Eaton fire, but you should look at the footprint of the Kinaloa fire. Right there. Let me zoom in for you guys. Right at the bottom of the Angeles National Forest into Altadena, where it burned up a bunch of homes. Now, does that fire perimeter look familiar to you guys? This is the Eaton fire from January. Now, let's put them on the same page. Look at these two fires. They're in the exact same spot. Now, obviously, the Eaton fire extended way, way farther into Altadena than the Kinaloa fire did in 1993. And that has a little to do with alignment. It has a little to do with higher density. And it also has to do with the fuels. It has a lot to do with the fuels. But if you look at these fire footprints, it's pretty crazy how similar they are. It's very crazy. And I'm not sure how many people who speak on the Eaton fire are even aware that the Kinaloa fire ever happened. I never saw people talking about it in the media. And in the same way, I didn't hear anybody talking about the previous fires in the Palisades, except for that one lady who happened to get interviewed. Just that one little blip of responsible journalism, which was just accidental, of course. But when you look at this map, there's something that really stands out. The fire perimeters are very, very similar. And the conditions on the Kinaloa fire were very, very similar. It was like 60 to 70 mile per hour winds. I think it was maybe like 50 to 60 is what they're saying. But again, like some of that stuff is so convoluted, it's kind of hard to say. Now, where exactly did the Eaton fire start? Now, the Kinaloa fire was a wizard fire. It was a wizard who was trying to stay warm in late October and started this fire and devastated a bunch of homes. The Eaton fire was power lines. Where exactly did it start? Right there. Now, let's look at these maps again. Let's zoom out, and you can see that this is on the Angeles National Forest. See all that green? All of this green indicates the Angeles National Forest. Superpav says he hiked the ANF north of there yesterday. It's spicy out there still. Dude, I can only imagine. It was a gnarly fire. Now, this fire is on the Angeles National Forest. And of course, Gavin Newsom is always talking about fires burning on federal lands. And like I said, I think it's too much of a stretch to blame Gavin Newsom for the Eaton fire, because it was burning on the Angeles National Forest. And they'd been trying to do some firing operations in Eaton Canyon for a long time, and it was SoCal Edison who started this fire. But let's look at exactly where that fire started. Is this on federal land? Now, the thing is, now that we've determined the precise tower from which that ignition came, it's actually a lot closer. It is way closer to Altadena than I thought. Now, we got to look at where exactly the FRA is. Now, we have the State Responsibility Area viewer. I'm going to pull that up for you guys. So I want to see, because I'm pretty sure this is on federal lands, right? But it's a lot closer to Altadena than I thought. So now we got to look here. Now, one of the frustrating things about this SRA viewer, and what this is doing is it's showing you which areas are LRA, local responsibility area, SRA, which is yellow, state responsibility area, and then green, which is federal responsibility area. Now, whatever morons created this map decided that they were going to make the SRA a creamy greenish yellow. And the FRA is a very, very light, almost yellow green, to the point where you actually can barely distinguish the FRA from the SRA. And from this perspective, yeah, it looks like that's all FRA, right? That's all Forest Service land. That's all Forest Service land, right? Well, here's the thing, guys. Let me show you a little more contrast. So this is where the fire started. Now let's superimpose the SRA map. Uh-oh. I boosted the contrast here so you can clearly delineate between the FRA and the SRA, the Foxtrot responsibility area, the federal responsibility area, and the state. This is in the state responsibility area. I was wrong. Now, everybody says that it started on the Angeles National Forest. Their boundary actually stops in this area. It stops mid-slope. This is state responsibility area. Now, the LA County Fire Department is a contract agency of CAL FIRE. So rather than having a bunch of CAL FIRE stations around here, where it would be pretty redundant, they just pay LA County Fire to respond to brush fires in their state responsibility areas. So LA County was the agency with jurisdiction over this. This fire started in the state responsibility area, not the federal responsibility area. And this area this is the Eaton Canyon natural area. This is an LA County area. This is not federal lands. So the burns that they're talking about for the feds, they were deeper in the canyon, like Chantry, like the Chantry Flats area, I think. This area where it ignited and spread into the community, state responsibility area. So what does that mean, guys? What does this mean? Are the lawyers going to add this to the Eaton Fire lawsuit? Now, the legal argument that they're using for the Palisades is that the state created a dangerous condition on their property. Now, they did that in two ways. One, they didn't do their fuels clearance, which for sure had not happened in the Eaton Canyon natural area. Now, again, this is LA County administered, but it's the state responsibility area. So if they were going to do any firing operations out there, it'd be CAL FIRE and LA County Fire working together on that. The other way that they created a dangerous condition on the Palisades is unique to the Palisades fire and does not apply to the Eaton fire, in that they had a brush fire several days prior that they didn't properly extinguish. And they allowed that fire to continue burning, which endangered everybody. So they had two dangerous conditions on state property. Now, this fire started in the state responsibility area, and then the federal government promptly paid 100% of the firefighting costs. Now, the feds have sued Southern California Edison to recoup their expenses and for damages to federal lands. What about the state? Is the state responsible? This is their state responsibility area. Guys, I was wrong. This whole time, here I am thinking, I'm being generous. I'm showing I'm not a partisan guy. I'm not going to try to do this bank shot where I blame the Eaton fire on Gavin because it started on the Angeles National Forest. but for it starting maybe like another mile or two up the road, yeah, it would have been Forest Service. But this is in the state responsibility area. I'm humbled. This doesn't happen often, guys, but I was wrong. I don't know how I overlooked this, but I'm gonna blame the bizarre color coding on this stupid map. Can you guys, maybe I'm just colorblind, but when I look at this, dude, I have to really squint to delineate what is SRA. Like, why did they have to make these colors so damn close? Like, you really have to zoom in to see that. It's kind of obnoxious. Why couldn't they have made the green like a dark green, you know? And they should have made, like, the state color is gold, right? Why didn't they just make it like a dark gold to stand out? The way look at the way that I did it. That's so much better. So yeah, dude, state responsibility area, both fires. Now, technically the Palisades fire was in the local responsibility area, but this is why it's so confusing. It was on Topanga State Park, but technically that's in the LRA, right? Let me just confirm that. I don't want to be wrong twice. But let's look at our viewer. It should be in the LRA, from what I understand. And looking at it, here we are in the Palisades, yeah. Yeah, for some reason, Topanga State Park, at least half of it, it's in the LRA, even though it's state property. I don't understand some of this, but either way, they're both Gavin's fault. So now, we talked about the unprecedented fires that are absolutely precedented, and the absolutely precedented winds that occurred on this. Now, I showed you guys this. This is firerebuild.com. This is the weather report and analysis from the Palisades fire, where they put together all the reports from all these weather stations throughout the area. And as you can see, they were not clocking 100 miles per hour. Even if they had clocked 100 miles per hour, we know that the last time we saw the Palisades burn like this in 1978, they were clocking 100 miles per hour. Now, I would say that's probably just as reliable as this. I don't think the winds are ever surfacing at 100 miles per hour here. I've talked about this a lot. A lot of times, we're taking readings off of weather stations where it's like, that's not actually surfacing over the fire. But maybe the winds really were that bad. You guys see this video?
Where'd I go?
Now, this was posted from the community brigade. I'm assuming is one of the guys who filmed it. And they had like a little passive aggressive comment, like, it wasn't that windy. I think they were either coming at Spencer or myself. Here's the thing, guys. I've been very consistent, okay? I've been very consistent. I've said over and over and over again, Palisades fire is a wind-driven fire. 38 mile per hour winds on your fire is a nightmare, okay? I've never said it wasn't that windy. But when you tell me that they had 100 mile per hour gusts, I will say, yeah, it wasn't that windy, because this is how windy it was. These winds on your fire are a nightmare, but they are not 100 miles per hour. Now, the thing is, the community brigade, they get a lot of crap from firefighters. I know a lot of firefighters don't like what they're doing, and they're concerned these guys are gonna get hurt. Because they don't have a lot of experience. I like it. I like the community brigade. I love the idea of civilians and residents taking command, and like we're saying multiple times, I really like the idea of guys stepping up and trying to help their neighbors and staying and defending, rather than having this like powerless approach where we're just going to leave and hope that government saves our home. I don't like that. Keegan Gibbs, solid dude, really like that guy. But the truth is they don't really have any fire experience. They've only been on like maybe 2 or 3 fires. And a lot of these guys are media guys who are, they're probably just interested in getting closer to the action. And they don't really know exactly what they're looking at. And when they posted this, they may not have known that they're not looking at winds, okay? And that's the irony of this post. You notice the direction of where the smoke is going, right? It's not going out towards the ocean. All of a sudden, it's going, west to east? All of a sudden? Why is it doing it? I want some of my firefighters who are in here, you'll be able to, especially when you watch the top end of this clip, you're gonna be able to identify exactly what's happening here, okay? These guys weren't able to identify what's happening here. Steve Carrion says, I met a bunch of the brigade guys at a conference. They're awesome and trained. They were there to learn. Yeah, I'm a big fan of them stepping up and doing their thing. But what they posted right here, look right here at the top. See that fire running uphill? I'm gonna bring it to being. See the fire running uphill right there? Now, the prevailing winds on this fire are blowing out towards the ocean, not like this, not across PCH, not like alongside PCH. So what's happening here is, this is a setup that I've seen dozens of times. This fire that's burning uphill in like a little half caldera, like in that, it's already gonna create a vortex. And as you can see with the nature of these winds right here, that fire is right in the center of that vortex. So you have these down canyon winds that are coming through like this. You have fire burning uphill through this like clamshell. That right there is the perfect setup for a fire whirl. And this is what you get. This is rotation from a vortex. And so this is a temporary slam of high intensity winds in a vortex that's dropping down and is gonna run across the street. I've seen this multiple times, and this is the exact same setup every single time. It starts at a slightly elevated position where you have fire burning in a half bowl, and it burning in that bowl, it just generates that vortex because of just normal fluid dynamics, right? And I saw this on, what was it? The Tanaha fire, where it burned uphill just like in the exact same spot, ran a fire whirl that walked across the street and started a spot fire on the other side. I also saw this on, now keep in mind, the Tanaha fire was not a wind-driven fire. But when you have a setup like this, you can create these vortexes that will create these momentary pushes of really intense downdrafts, just like this. And I saw this is on the lake fire. And this was not a wind-driven fire. This was fuels and topography. But you had this similar setup, look just above the toe of the slope, where you have fire generating, and you can see it's starting to spin up vortexes. And then column collapses, and then you'll see it just gets worse and worse, where all of a sudden we have these gnarly winds and it's starting to throw fire across the road and spotting like a quarter mile ahead of itself. And then you can see here, column gets drawn entirely across the street, super erratic. This is sort of a classic setup. So even though it's a very impressive, it's a very impressive video, but I'm not quite sure that they realized that they were looking at a vortex. Now, we know what the gusts were. We know what the winds were. They were plenty bad. Have you guys seen this video? We've been told over and over that helicopters couldn't fly because it was so windy. What is this? Now, this is from 1:15 in the afternoon. So this is well into the incident. And the winds, like we were told that helicopters couldn't fly in this. The other thing is, see these guys, the helitankers. These guys, they have a pretty low threshold for what they can take off in. And I believe it's 30 knots. Like they can't even start up the rotors if the winds are over 30 knots. And yet here they are, two of them, filling up at 69 Bravo all day long. All day long. How bad could the winds possibly be? We were told that the winds up on 69 Bravo were like 100 miles an hour. How is this possible? Like, this is a long time lapse too. Here we are, it's now 3 in the afternoon. Still going, still refilling. And notice how far away this refill site is. They could be refilling right basically where the smoke is coming from, at the San Ynez Reservoir. But because it was empty, those helispots were offline. So here they are, still flying, 4 in the afternoon now. It's 4 in the afternoon. I thought we were told we had unprecedented winds and all aircraft couldn't fly. Do you guys remember that from the McChrystal report? Remember that fake report that came out talking about, oh yeah, nothing went wrong on the Eaton Fire and the Palisades Fire with all the evacuations, where they said fueled by hurricane force winds that grounded all firefighting aircraft. Are you guys as sick of this stuff as I am? I'm so tired of people telling me that they're like pissing on my leg and telling me that it's raining. Brandon Taylor, same thing happened. Dude, you said that before I showed the video, didn't you? You're on top of it, man. Of course you're on top of it. Brandon, you remember, I'm assuming you were there, right, man? There was like a 800 to 1,000 foot fire whirl on that thing. Remember? Like once they had to like push all the vehicles out of there and they had to tell the media, everybody's got to get out. There was like a 1,000 foot tall fire whirl. And it was a very similar setup. It was, fire. It was actually fire coming on all sides of this mound. And it just, because it was burning sort of unilaterally all around this ring, as it was coming up this cone, it just creates this vortex that was extremely powerful. And it was sucking in tumbleweeds from like 300 feet away or more, and sucking in tumbleweeds into it, setting them on fire, and then shooting them out. He said, I was further out watching it come towards me, and I saw you drive out like 5 minutes after. Yeah, dude, I was deep in it. That was a really gnarly fire. And look, the lake fire, I'll just show this video in the background as we're talking about it. This was not a wind-driven fire. This was just fuels and topography. It was pretty light winds on this thing. And these erratic winds are coming from thermodynamics. This is coming from the fire producing its own weather. Now, even though the Palisades fire was a wind-driven fire, it was wind-dominated, it's still also going to produce its own weather on top of that. It's not going to be as extreme as the lake fire, which is a plume-dominated fire where the fire is really regulating what the weather is doing. Palisades fire was definitely more of a wind-driven fire. I will say it again, guys, there was plenty of wind. This is bad. You tell anybody, you tell any soup, any division, hey man, you're gonna get 36 to 44 mile per hour winds on your fire. They're gonna start drinking early, dude. That is not a good day, okay? I don't know how many times I gotta say this for people to like, stop acting like I'm saying, oh, it wasn't that windy. Like I said, when you tell me that it was unflyable and that it was 100 miles per hour, I will tell you that no, it was not that windy. There's a reason why I keep saying that. I'm not trying to be like a heckler. It's just, we have all this evidence. Like, we all saw the helicopters in the air. There was like a dozen copters on the initial attack. And the problem is that they had to come all the way out here to 69 Bravo to refill. And that was the main problem. We saw how effective their drops were. When they were able to do work, they did work very effectively. The problem was the reload time. Like I said, this drop right here, and this is part of the QRF guys that we just saw refilling at 69 Bravo. And you can see, this is a relatively long video, but them coming in right through here, these drops were extremely effective, and they saved all but one of these homes. And you can see in the video, there's no resources on the ground. So this is just an aerial attack, and you can see his little rooster tail underneath that. So this was entirely an aerial attack. That's one of the striking things about watching this video, is that you don't see any resources set up for structure protection anywhere. There's nothing there. So it was only an aerial attack, and they were very effective. This is why it's such a problem. And you'll notice, like, going through the rest of this video, how long their flight is to get out of the fire zone. It's just nonstop. They had to go so far to reload. Look at this. Still going. They're not even halfway. They're not even halfway to where they could reload. And if they had the reservoir, they could reload right there. Brutal. Brandon Taylor. Yeah, I was parked next to that hill and moved back like 2,000 feet down the road and it went crazy. Yeah. We all know, like, I feel like all the media and all the firefighters who were there on that fire, they all know the hill. There was just this one hill. I'll pull that clip up, but if you've seen my movie, you've seen the firewall. It was very dramatic. And there was the hill that seemed to be perfectly set up to create that condition. And that's the thing is like, as you get more experience on these fires, you can start to see where those setups happen. And you understand that a fire whirl can create very, very sudden, unpredictable, and erratic winds, like you see in that video that the community brigade posted. This is a fire whirl, and it's creating a vortex. You'll notice how the winds are kind of chill, they're kind of chill, they're kind of chill, and then you see that rotation. And then when that dumps down, it's sort of like a mountain wave, but it's not a mountain wave. This is the fire whirl pushing its way through with, see it right there? That's the fuel that's feeding it uphill, and then it's combining with that down canyon blast. And then you've got, dude, like the winds through there are pretty unmitigated, and they come down canyon, they get funneled pretty badly. But that's rotation. That's the fire generating that wind. And so it just shows you guys that like, you got to be careful. You got to really like know where you're at. You got to understand these setups, because that can break bad pretty quickly. And I saw it break bad on the Tanaha fire, where that wasn't just smoke coming across the road, but there was an actual fire whirl that crossed the road and sent a spot fire onto the other side. Unfortunately, I did have footage of that, but then my backpack ripped open and I lost one of my memory cards that had that footage in it. It still haunts me to this day. Daniel Firecopter says, could they maybe make more heliphones for water reload? I mean, they could, but I mean, how many do we need? This is the thing. This is the crazy thing about the Palisades. They have 2 reservoirs. Both of them have heliphones, and both of them were empty. When they made this reservoir, this is from the LA Times back in 1968, when they had awarded the bid for the reservoir, where they said explicitly, back in the day, this was for domestic and firefighting purposes. And there's a reason for that, right? We've seen the history of all the fires there, long before the 60s. There is a very good reason why they made that for firefighting purposes. Now, how far away is 69 Bravo? I think it's like 7 miles from the Palisades. And the thing is, like, those 2 reservoirs in the Palisades, they're a mile apart from each other as the crow flies. So you would think that those 2 reservoirs would be enough. They'd be enough to manage the Palisades. This is what they were designed for. And yet they were both offline. This is why it's so crazy to me. Because it's like, if you're going to take one of them offline, why didn't you bring back the other one? Well, they said it was cracked, there was damage, we were worried about it. Okay, understood. But now, okay, now I'm getting some footage. This is from the lake fire, yeah? All right, let me see if I can show you this. This is great. Okay, awesome. Brandon Taylor coming in clutch. Let me show you what we're looking at here. So anyway, just to finish my point about the reservoirs, yeah, maybe we could have more, but I honestly, two reservoirs in the Palisades would have been enough if they were just online. So here's, yeah, this looks very familiar. This is the hill. Here's the fire whirl from the lake fire. No wind here. This is not a wind-driven fire. But look, you see how it's walking its way up? And you see how all the fire on the other sides of that hill, it's getting sucked in like that? Let's see how this thing develops. This is when it starts ripping up really high. And it got so high, I was initially, look at this thing. See how it's just sucking in the wind from the other side? Sucking in the fire from the other side. Look at that thing. Incredible. That doesn't show the scope of it, but it certainly shows the intensity of how that vortex, oh, there it is. That's when it started shooting up like 1,000 feet in the air. Dude, so gnarly. Awesome shot. See, dude, that's great, because this looks like those old photos we were looking at in the 1970s. Incredible, man. I wonder if my Jeep's in any of these pictures. But yeah, I was right there, basically the same vantage point. And yeah, dude, we must have been like right next to each other. Your shot looks almost identical to mine. But yeah, you can see how that vortex is sucking in the fire from the other sides of the mound with incredible intensity. And this is not wind. This is And see, look at those trees on the left. And I don't know if you can see it, but there's like big old tumbleweeds. I can see it in my footage, but like these giant tumbleweeds that were getting sucked into this vortex. And the winds that are generated from that are so intense. Yeah, that thing was, look at that. See, like that level of fire raking across the landscape like that, even in some of the gnarliest wind-driven fires, you will not see fire lean down that much. So just the heat, just the thermodynamics of that fire, that convection right there is creating higher intensity winds than the winds can generate themselves. There was another, maybe the gnarliest case of this was the Beckworth complex. The Beckworth complex where we got hit by an actual tornado that got registered on radar. Yeah, look at that thing. That's massive. That's borderline tornado, but not quite. Not quite. But the one on the Beckworth actually became a tornado. And there were multiples. There were multiple like smaller ones. And they persisted and actually walked all the way across state lines. They crossed the 395. And because the particular setup that they have up in that area around Honey Lake, where you have this shallow warm water lake, and to the west, you have this massive forest elevated above this rock escarpment. And so because of that escarpment, any winds are no longer filtered by any trees. So you get these really gnarly downdrafts down off that escarpment. And then it mixes with the warm air that's rising off of Honey Lake. And so you get this perfect conveyor belt where the winds are coming off the escarpment, hitting the fire, and then the fire is adding its own convection on top of that Honey Lake area. And so you have this perfect setup for fire tornadoes. And there's actually an FLA on that area where there was a burnover and a deployment because I think in the 80s, there was a very similar fire to the Beckworth complex where a massive fire whirl ripped up and blasted 395 towards Honey Lake. So this is why you need to learn your fire history, because you need to know what you're looking at. Understand, you're not looking at wind gusts, you are looking at basically a fire tornado that's building up. When you recognize the hallmarks of what that setup is, it can keep you alive, okay? So this is something that I encourage everybody. Carr Fire had a fire tornado, it killed a Reading firefighter. KCK, you are 100% right. You are 100% right. The Carr Fire had, and CARR fire, had a legitimate fire tornado on it that I think flipped a dozer. It was that intense. That might be the worst one on record. The one that I saw on the Beckworth complex, it was pretty gnarly, but it wasn't anything like the Carr Fire. Carr Fire was absolutely brutal. That was a fatality fire up in Reading, and it was just devastating. That stuff was absolutely gnarly. So anyway, yeah, guys, learn your fire history, or you will be condemned to repeat it. I mean, this image is so iconic. From 1978, just as that lady said, it's the same exact fire. So when are we going to learn our lesson? When are we going to do all the right things? Ever? Or are we just going to keep seeing this repeated? Like if we end up having a fire like this in the Palisades again in 2038, like 100 years to the day, I'm just going to retire. But remember this one, 1956, the Eaton Fire. This was on Christmas Day. Christmas Day. So when you hear Gavin Newsom saying, we're having these unprecedented winds in the winter, it's like, this is when they happen. This is why it's so frustrating. I know I get overly frustrated with Gavin, but it's because of this. It's because it's just like this nonstop rewriting of history, this complete bullshit. Daniel Firecopter says they should start by clearing out Topanga. Exactly. We need the community brigade to expand. And I think it is expanding. I think it's getting pretty popular. I think it's a really good idea. And like I said, I really like Keegan, solid dude, really good dude. And I know he nerds out on this stuff. And so what I'd love to see is if they could get into brush clearance. Brush clearance would be massive. Now, I've heard some stories of some people who maybe used to be operators who went out in the middle of the Palisades fire and they didn't take around a a fire hose. They took around a rake and a chainsaw, and they cut some fuels and maybe saved some homes. Or maybe that's just a rumor. Maybe we'll never know. Anyway, guys, thanks for all the comments. Brandon Taylor says they're adding like 45 new guys to the brigade, but there are 3,000 plus people trying to join. Holy mackerel. You know, here's the thing. You don't need to be in a brigade, right? So what the brigade represents is like taking ownership over your own space. And in this case, your own community. But what would be even better is if everybody treated themselves as a brigade for their home. So instead of having a brigade with 45 new guys or even 3,000 guys who are all going to hop into trucks and then go patrol the neighborhood, if everybody became their own brigade and cleared their brush and created a safe environment where they could shelter in place and stayed and defend their homes and maybe the few homes around them, I think that would be absolutely outstanding. Like I said, I really like the idea of the community brigade. I like Keegan. And I think it's good that people are finally trying to take ownership. And I think for Keegan, it was because, you know, they got rocked in the Woolsey fire. And I think that was a very formative experience for him. And, you know, he, like I said, he nerds out on this stuff. So he knows his fire history and he knows it's inevitable. And so it was good that he was really diligent about standing up that brigade following the Woolsey fire, because it was just 7 years later that they'd be in the show immediately. So anyway, everyone should become their own brigade. Learn how to defend your own property. Be ready for it. It'll be good for you. Just, you know, you gotta learn enough so that you can do it safely. Like, learn what you're looking at when you see setups like this, so you know that maybe that you're not in a good spot. And like the whole key to successfully defending your home and not evacuating is that discernment of knowing when you're in the shit and when you need to get out, versus when you can shelter in place. All right. That is like, that's probably the linchpin between living and dying. So don't just do it willy nilly. Make sure that you have a good safety zone and you know what you're looking at. Otherwise things can surprise you real quick. Anyway, Steve Kerrigan says, never knew some. My goodness, guys. I was trying to be polite. I was trying to be generous and not pin the Eaton Fire on him. But man, Eaton Fire was in the SRA. Newsom is 2 for 2. Brutal. Absolutely brutal. The worst fires in California's history. It's like 70 to 80% of them are all under Gavin's watch. It's incredible. Brandon Taylor says, but that's when all the fun stuff happens. This is why you need to learn your fire behavior. So that way you don't have to leave when the fun stuff happens. All right, guys, on that note, remember, the only way to prove that you're not AI, the only way to prove that you're human is to do it live. Thanks for doing it live with me, guys. See you guys tomorrow.